It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, He knows the parameters of the reel. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Donald Trump rolls into all fear all the time. He's tweeted out a new ad in which a Hispanic guy, I think he's Mexican, who killed a couple of cops in the United States, had been deported to Mexico. Mexico deported him back to us so that he could stand trial. At his trial, he was like, "Yeah, I want to kill more cops." And so Trump turns this into a 60-second TV ad. It's just like Willie Horton, right? And he has this interview with Axios that's just absolutely breathtaking. The entire thing is going to play on, I believe, HBO this weekend. But a clip of it was released this morning, and some of the news media picked it up. Jim Vandehei, the reporter from Axios, he said, this is what he said to Trump. He said, "Don't you worry at all. You're the most powerful man in the world. And if you say that word, enemy, there are tens of thousands of people who go to a stadium to listen to you, and people go on social media and they get themselves so jazzed up. That's got to be part of you. There's got to be a part of you that's scared somebody's going to take it too far." And without hesitation, Trump said, "It's my only form of fighting back." And then he added, "I wouldn't be here without these attacks." And in fact, he said, "I think I'm doing a service by attacking the media and calling them enemies of the people." He said, people write stories about me that are so wrong." Oh, poor little snowflake, Donnie. But, you know, the reality is that the only reason, or the main reason, that they're campaigning on fear is that they've got nothing else, the Republicans. I mean, in the 1980s, and those of you old enough to remember this, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. After Jimmy Carter went down in flames because Reagan's campaign chief, Bill, it'll come to me anyhow. Reagan's campaign chief was cut a deal with the Iranians, and Abdullah Bani Sadr, President Bani Sadr of Iran, now lives in the United States. He's a professor up in the Northeast, and he wrote an op-ed. You can read it in the Christian Science Monitors. Just explicitly say, "I was president of Iran. The Reagan campaign contacted the mullahs. They said, if you'll hold the hostages until after the election, we'll sell you spare parts and weaponry for all that American-made military and Air Force that you've got that the Shah used to have. You need American parts. Here's how you'll get them. We'll sell them to you under the table. But you just have to get us elected. And the Iranians did it. And so you know, Reagan comes into power, and all these think tanks that had been started back 9 years earlier after the Powell memo, they were just cranking stuff out. You know, the Republican Party is the party of ideas. You know, we've got all these great new concepts. And Reagan came out and said, you know, government is terrible. You got to trust the big corporations and the billionaires instead of the government. The 9 most dangerous and frightening words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. No, you should be getting help from your church. You know, if you need food, if you need medical care, if you need help, go to your local church or go to your local business or go to your local billionaire. They'll help you out. Government shouldn't be doing that. And for, you know, 5-6 years of the Reagan administration, a lot of Americans bought that. They thought, okay, you know, we'll try this. It's very different. We haven't seen this in our lifetimes. You know, the people who had seen America when it ran the way that Reagan wanted, which is back in the 1920s, they were dying, you know, or old folks nobody was paying attention to. So Reagan sold this you know, this scam. But, you know, within 8 years, most Americans had figured out that it was a scam. So when Reagan's vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush, wanted to run for president in '88, he didn't have anything to run on anymore, right? I mean, the tax cuts had already happened, and they hadn't really changed the dynamics of the American economy. It was Jimmy Carter who wrung the inflation out, by and large. I mean, there was still a little bit the first year or two of Reagan's administration, but much like, you know, Obama putting the economy back on track and then Trump claiming credit for it, really Carter had put the economy back on track. And, you know, it hurt him. I mean, those high interest rates to stop the inflation from the oil embargo as a consequence of the oil embargo, it hurt him politically. And then Reagan claimed credit for it, just like Trump is doing. But anyhow, by '88, Americans had figured this out. The whole thing is a scam. So what did George Herbert Walker Bush do to run for re-election, or to run for election as president in '88? The Willie Horton ads, right? He had Paul Manafort's shop put together these racist ads claiming that Michael Dukakis had let this black rapist murderer out of jail, and he did it again. And, you know, it worked. It worked. Fear and specifically racialized fear got George Bush the elder elected. Overwhelmingly, by the way. And, you know, and Dukakis was just wiped out. In '92, when George Bush was running for re-election, basically the only policy idea at that point that the Republicans had, which they had been pushing for a long time, was NAFTA. You know, was so-called global free trade. Do away with our tariffs. Stop protecting American industries. Let big companies in America ship jobs overseas. And the problem that he had in '92, trying to sell this idea, most Americans weren't buying it. But Bill Clinton was also trying to sell that idea, which is why Ross Perot came into this race as an independent. I mean, literally created a political party out of nothing, had as a running mate Admiral Stockdale, who couldn't, you know, he was like, who am I? Why am I here? I mean, I realize it was rhetorical questions, but, you know, the guy didn't know how to give a political speech. And despite that, Ross Perot took almost 20% of the vote. But the Republicans, basically, all they had was a scam. And so, again, George W. Bush, he lost the election by 500,000 votes in 2000. His brother had to suppress the black vote in Florida for George Bush to even get within 500 votes of Al Gore. And then he had to have 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court hand him the presidency because the Republicans had nothing to sell other than fear. And then 9/11 happened, and George Bush kicked into high fear mode. Oh, yeah, we're going to have wars in countries that had nothing to do with this, but we're going to have wars because we need to be afraid. And that got him reelected. Fear. It's all the Republicans have. And then Obama came along and said, no, I don't want to pitch fear. I'm hope and change. And the Americans were like, thank God. And Obama gets 2 terms, and then he gets term limited. And Hillary Clinton comes along and she says, I'm going to campaign on hope and change too. We've got a forward-looking progressive agenda. And she actually did, and the Democratic Party did. I mean, it didn't go quite as far as Bernie's did, but, you know, it was pretty good. And she won by 3 million votes. And the only reason that Donald Trump became president was because Scott Walker suppressed the vote of about 200,000 people in Wisconsin. Rick Snyder suppressed the vote of about 150,000 people in Michigan. I don't remember the name. I'm not sure I even knew the name of the governor of Pennsylvania. Suppressed the vote there by over 100,000 people. And John Kasich in Ohio suppressed the vote in Ohio by hundreds of thousands of people. And in each one of those 4 states, Donald Trump won by, 10, 20, 30,000 people. In total, 72,000 people. When the voter suppression effort in those 4 states was like over 1 million people, or in the neighborhood of 1 million people. Because, again, the Republicans have nothing. They've got nothing except, oh, my God, be afraid, look out, there's brown people coming for you. Whether it was brown Muslims or whether it was brown Mexicans or whether it's brown Guatemalans now, whatever it is, it's like, oh, my God, there's brown people coming for you. That's all they've got to sell. I mean, their policies are so insane that we might be looking at a cancer epidemic in the United States caused by pharmaceuticals as a direct result of what Republicans say are their policies. I'll tell you about that after the break. Stick around. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The question I would ask you, given this whole fear thing, is how do we best combat fear? I think you do it with hope and change. But what do you think? And welcome back. Let's see here. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, speaking about brown people being afraid, Republicans being afraid of brown people, did you hear about the Afro-American couple that was called the cops on in Pennsylvania?
I didn't. No, I didn't.
Oh, there was a couple. They were canvassing for Jesse King, a Democrat,
right,
who was challenging Representative Lloyd Schmucker, and the lady called the cops on them she accused them of trespassing and accused them of bringing socialism. But the Democrats are not responsible for bringing socialism. It's the inequality gap.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you hear these things. Raw Story is probably one of the sites one of the more well-known sites, and that's not specifically focused on black issues. And almost every day they've got a story up on Raw Story about some crazed white person calling the police on some absolutely innocent, normal black person going about their lives in an absolutely innocent, normal way. But oh my God, they're mowing their lawn while black. They're gardening while black. Apparently, it's illegal in Pennsylvania to go door to door canvassing while black. I mean, it's just incredible. Dion, thanks for the call and thanks for the information. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartman. Okay, all fear all the time.
Yeah.
I believe it started with the Caravan and Kavanaugh, who was birthed by Newt Gingrich. Now, I saw your interview with him on your show about 2 years ago. Is his goal to absolutely destroy the word compromise, which is the way that a two-party system must work in order to create a better union?
Yeah, I mean, that was the essence of his contract on America back in 96, I think. They took the House, and might have been 98, but I'm pretty sure it was 96. And maybe even 94, anyhow, during the Clinton years. And right. The contract on America, 6 of the 10 items all pointed back to the same piece of legislation, which was a massive tax cut for rich people and corporations. And Gingrich introduced the concept of never compromise, and these are enemies. And I mean, I think that Newt Gingrich probably, more than anybody in the recent era, in the last 30 years, has been responsible for the radicalization of the Republican Party, or at least setting the tone for it. And he continues to. He continues to be a spokesman for this kind of stuff. And
okay, so who is who is the power behind Newt Gingrich? Is it the Koch brothers? Is it, I don't know.
Oh, it's the right wing, the right wing billionaires. Again, this goes back to Reagan. Well, it goes back to the Powell memo in '71, and then Lewis Powell in '76 on the Supreme Court saying that, you know, billionaire and corporate money being thrown into political campaigns is simply free speech protected by the First Amendment. And then that gets us Ronald Reagan. And then Reagan uses that to consolidate the power of the very wealthy by blowing up our tax structure that was maintaining a solid middle class and some semblance of you know, less inequality anyway in the United States. And, you know, here we are. And it's all been financed by the billionaires who you know, I mean, they've got to be looking at the people who watch Fox News and just laughing their heads off. You know, these idiots, they're so afraid of, you know, 1,000 brown women and children coming from Guatemala while we're picking their pockets. They've just got to be laughing, Michael. Michael, thanks for the call. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going. I wanted to take this to the next step. The Republicans, you know, their big idea, right? They tried to make this comeback during the Bush administration. I believe this was around 2005. The fear was fading, right, by 2005. Bush got elected through fraud. You know, his brother suppressed the black vote in Florida. He lost to Al Gore by more than 500,000 votes. So he gets elected by fraud. And then 9/11 happens, and so he can play the fear card even more effectively than his daddy did. And by the way, this is something he told his biographer back in 1998. He told Mickey Herskowitz that he hoped would happen, right? He's like, if I get a chance to invade Iraq, I'm not going to do it like my father did and only do it for 100 hours. You know, I'm going to have a real war. And I'm going to get, you know, my agenda done, which, you know, was mostly privatizing Social Security. So in 2005, George Bush said, you know, let's go back to Republican ideas. And he had two big ideas. And one was, expanding Medicare so that drugs were paid for. And the other was privatizing Social Security. He went on the road on a road trip trying to pitch privatizing Social Security. That didn't work out all that well. But the Medicare Part D thing, you know, that got through Congress. It got bipartisan support. But they wrote into the law, and frankly, I think it had been in our law for a while up until that point anyway, but this law reinforced it, that you and I can't import drugs from overseas. If you're taking, you know, a drug, you know, I take a blood pressure drug, for example, you know, candesartan. There's this whole class of drugs there. They're called something class 2 inhibitors. You know, they suppress a hormone that makes your blood pressure go up, basically. And if you take this drug, if you take, you know, these family of drugs, guess what? We were told that we can't. I was told I was told I can't. You know, I'm paying $180 a month for candesartan, right? It costs probably a dime to manufacture this stuff. You can buy it in Canada for $20. But I can't import it from Canada because that's unsafe. This is what the Republicans told us. It would be unsafe if you imported your drugs. Well, this family of drugs, these whatever they are, angiotensin II inhibitors, turns out that most of them are made in China or India. In fact, 80% of all our drugs are now made in China or India, most of them in China. And the Food and Drug Administration, this is Maggie Fox over at ABC News, the Food and Drug Administration has broadened a recall of the common blood pressure drug valsartan, saying some batches have been contaminated with a potentially cancer-causing chemical. Several generic valsartan products sold in the U.S. have been found to be contaminated with NDMA. NDMA is rocket fuel, and it gets into water supplies really easily, and it super contaminates water really rapidly. There was an NDMA contamination problem with an aquifer in California years ago. It's rocket fuel, and it causes cancer. And it was made by the Zhejiang Huai Pharmaceutical Company in Shanghai, China. Rosemary Gibson, healthcare expert with the Hastings Center, wrote a book called China RX, Exposing the Risks of American Dependence on China for Medicine. Wrote, China doesn't have anything like the consumer protection laws and product liability laws the United States does. In fact, back in 2007, 81 Americans died because of contaminated heparin that came from China, the blood thinner heparin. But the scariest part about it is, and this is in this article from NBC News. Did I say ABC News? It's NBC News. China made a strategic decision. This was back, back when we were sold this bill of goods about free trade, right? China made a strategic decision to develop its pharmaceutical industry and has succeeded, undercutting prices and grabbing market share from other countries. Penicillin is a good example, says this one expert. Her name is Gibson, her last name. We don't make penicillin ingredients in the United States anymore at all. That happened because Chinese companies came in and dumped it on the global market at a very low price, and now they're the largest producer of penicillin industrial ingredients in the whole world. She adds, if China was to cut off shipments of pharmaceuticals to the United States, this is how dependent we are on China. While the Republicans are telling us we can't import cheaper, identical versions, they're probably also made in China, of these drugs from Canada or from Europe. You can't import those because that's not safe. But the drug companies can import them directly from China, from these. But in any case, she says, if China cut us off, quote, hospitals would become centers of chaos and death. We're not talking here about expensive designer drugs. We're talking antibiotics. And we're talking anesthesia. You couldn't do surgery. You wouldn't have anesthetics. You couldn't provide dialysis. End of quote. I mean, this is the insanity. When the Republicans do come along and say, well, instead of scaring the hell out of people, we actually have a policy to sell you. How about Medicare Part D? You get the donut hole. Medicare is forced to pay full retail for the pharmaceuticals, so the pharmaceutical industry gets a $600 billion windfall over the first decade. And the pharmaceutical companies can import all their stuff from China. Isn't that great?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And Americans end up with cancer and higher pharmaceutical prices, and they've figured it out, so the Republicans are back to selling fear. We're going to talk to Justin Frank about that right after the break. Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown. Panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, "The market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it," end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. "I think the game is pretty near up," Washington privately confessed at year's end. "To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it," the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. "Crisis may beget crisis," Franklin Roosevelt said as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. "But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward," end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, just a quick heads up. In fact, I'm just editing it right now. It's going on. It's got to be at the publishers by November 15th. I've got a new book that we did a Survey Monkey on for the title. The title is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. And we're doing another Survey Monkey here for the cover. And there's a couple of covers, and we'd like your opinion on them. And we just put it at the top of our Facebook page. You can check it out. And I believe Louise is going to tweet it now, too, the link to the Survey Monkey. So help us out with this and let us know what you think. We were talking about fear and hate, and basically this is all the Republicans have to sell these days. On the line with us is an expert on how the brain works and how these things work, Dr. Justin Frank. He is a psychoanalyst and clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at George Washington University. He wrote Bush on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President, then Obama on the Couch. His latest book just came out recently, Trump on the Couch. His Twitter handle is Justin Frank MD. And the website is obamaonthecouch.com. Dr. Frank, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be here.
Thank you. Go ahead.
There's a feedback I get.
Yeah. If you have your telephone there and you can pick your phone up and talk into it, that'll provide us with the very best audio, and there won't be any feedback.
Okay.
If that works. That's fine. That's just fine. So tell us how does fear work? How is it that politicians manipulate us with fear?
Well, fear. There's an article actually just now in the New York Times today or yesterday about the power of fear, how it affects the amygdala, which is the central part of the brain, where it activates people into feeling that they're not only threatened, but they feel an impulse to act and become violent.
Right.
And fear is a fundamental emotion that babies have. They have what's called night terrors when they're 2. They have.
Sir, could you pardon the interruption? Could you move the phone just a little closer to your mouth? It's a little hard to hear. So if you could just,
how's that?
It's better.
Better?
Yeah, that's much better. Okay, continue, please.
Okay. The issue about fear is that little babies have fear. They have stranger anxiety when they're 8 months old. They're very frightened of people who don't look like their mother or their father. So, pardon me. So fear is very much about the other. It's about someone who doesn't reflect their own face and their own image.
Right.
So fear is very much based on seeing someone who doesn't look like their mother or father when they're very little. And that's called stranger anxiety when they're about 8 months old. When the baby is about 2, they have what's called night terrors that everybody who's had small children is familiar with, where you have to go into the room and turn on the light to scare the demons away and reassure the child. I think that one of the things that's important about night terrors is that we all have had that, at least most of us, in our own experience. And so when Donald Trump stokes fear about the Mexican immigrants, fear about Muslims, fear about the news media, all of those things tap into those primitive feelings that are stored deep in the unconscious, deep in the brain, and they activate a very primitive part of the self. And what happens is there is a feeling at that time that words don't work, that there is no way to contain the fear. The goal in development is to be able to use words and put them in place so they can contain the fear. And I think that's one of the most important things that happens developmentally, is where you can use your words, as they say, so you don't have to express your fear physically, violently, externalize it. And one of the things that I wrote in my book, there's a chapter entitled, by the way, I love your idea about doing the cover search which is actually a pretty cool cover.
It is, yeah, for Trump on the Couch.
Yeah, it's fun. It's done by the guy from the New Yorker, Barry Blitt.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a chapter in there on language. And one of the things that's very clear about Donald Trump is that he has not been able to use language in the way that most of us can. And that is that as a little kid, he was very anxious, had trouble learning. And if you don't read and you can't learn, you really are much less able to contain fear. You can only use certain primitive coping mechanisms and defenses. And his had to do with being violent, making attacks, hitting out. He was always in trouble at school. And so he never really learned how to use words and language as containers to help him think. And now we see the results of this in his presidency.
Now, he went to college, more or less the same time I did. He's I think 5, 6 years older than I am. And I actually had a friend at MSU who was openly running a business selling term papers and even, essays for tests and things to students. That was an era when, and even in the elite universities, it was possible if you were wealthy enough and you could buy these things to literally never write a paper and still get a degree. Are you suggesting that perhaps the reason Donald Trump refuses to take the written CIA briefings is because he just can't read?
Yeah, he cannot read, and that's why he cannot take them. He also,
but he can read a teleprompter. I mean, is it? He can read the sort of. I mean, he reads it badly, but he
can read. He can read. It's big print, and he's standing up and he's moving around with a teleprompter. People with a certain kind of ADD are unable to sit still enough to read. They're very agitated. They're extremely impatient. So it's a combination of factors. It's not only the neurological wiring that makes it hard to read, which is part of it, but it's also the neurological wiring that makes a person impatient, unable to sit still, and very fidgety.
Right.
And I think that that's a huge part of it. In fact, I realized in the last week or two that I should never have named my book Trump on the Couch because he would be too fidgety to ever get on the couch.
Right.
He couldn't actually lie down.
Right. So the question that we're all confronted with, we're talking with Dr. Justin Frank, his latest book, Trump on the Couch, clinical professor of and psychoanalyst of psychiatry.
Whatever, yeah.
At George Washington University. So the question for all of us, and the question that I put out to my listeners this morning, and we'll be taking calls on when you and I are done here, is as a nation and as individuals, and frankly, for the Democrats as a party and as politicians, how do you best respond to a politician who is using fear as their principal tool? I mean, it worked really well for George Herbert Walker Bush. The Willie Horton ads got him elected. It worked really well for George W. Bush. I just retweeted a clip from the 2004 Republican convention where the words 9/11 were repeated and terrorism were repeated like dozens and dozens of times by every single speaker. Laura Bush, George Bush, right. Dick Cheney. It was all fear. We were sold fear by both Bushes, and it worked for both Bushes. And it's working for Trump. What do we do? How do we appropriately respond to this?
Well, the question is who the we is, first of all.
Right.
What happens is that we need to find somebody, and we only have about 4 days, who can talk like Franklin Roosevelt. He calmed the nation. We were terrified that we were going to lose the war in Germany. We were terrified about the Japanese invasion, Pearl Harbor. The nation was terrified, and Roosevelt had already started in 1933, way before those wars, with saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But he said it every week, a different version of it on the radio. The other thing he said was he defined fear in the second sentence of that inauguration speech when he called fear nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
I remember.
That is what's happening. People are paralyzed by their fear, and fear paralyzes people to take chances of talking about anything that might disrupt the status quo, that might disrupt Donald Trump that might confront the Republicans. People are afraid to take risks, and that is the purpose of fear. It paralyzes people.
Now, George Lakoff is suggesting that every time the media parrots something that Donald Trump says, even when they do so in order to say, can you believe this latest absurd lie from Donald Trump? Here's his lie. That, you know, it's like saying, don't think about an elephant. Immediately an elephant pops into mind. That even when they're rebutting his lies, they're actually amplifying them. And his suggestion was that the big newspapers and the media should have a little section, like on the page with the astrology and the cartoons, that is like, you know, Donald Trump's statements for the day, a little box, and they just, you know, they do their reporting in that, and that the news media should just handle it as, you know, well, here's the latest craziness out of the White House, quack, 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 and not do big panels and have long conversations and dig into it and make it break it. You know, is that the best way to do it?
Right. Yeah, the best way to do it. There's two parts to that. What Lakoff said is very important, and that is that just by repeating it, you're reminding people of it. And one of the things about that, and Lakoff learned that probably from George M. Cohan during World War I, who said, quote, I measure my publicity in inches. He did not really care about who said what about him as long as he was in the press.
Well, that was P.T. Barnum. Trump said that his favorite author was P.T. Barnum, and P.T. Barnum said, I don't care what you say about me, just spell my name right.
Now we can go, that's right, we can go back to that one. So the point is that that people remember Trump. He has figured out how to get his name everywhere. It's all over the country. It's all over the world in his towers. And so people are very much aware of it. But the second reason is a psychoanalytic one, a psychological one, to not repeat all the things. And that is that by not paying attention to him, it will make him more anxious. It will make him less effective as a speaker and as a dangerous person. Ignoring somebody like that is very important.
So you think his rallies are like a form of therapy for him?
His rallies are they are his therapy. There are two forms of therapy. One is the rallies, and the other is getting into arguments with people and mocking them like Pocahontas or various other things that he says. I thought that Gillum, the guy who's running for governor in Florida, has said it the best. He always quotes his grandmother, but I have a feeling he's the one who has said all these things. He said that I will not wrestle with a pig because you get dirty, but more than that, the pig likes it.
Right.
I really think that he has refused to engage with Trump or DeSantis on these issues because it really never works to the advantage. What Trump is also, and Reagan did this too, by the way, is a kind of what we call a narcissistic fighter. He's a person who fights using put down, never about content, never about policy. So even the people who are fact-checking in the media, people who are calling out Trump about his lies, is meaningless. All it does is reinforce, like Lakoff said, reinforce his name over and over again.
And they were, and back in the 80s,
it makes him feel better.
Yeah, and back in the 80s, they were constantly fact-checking Reagan. I actually subscribed to a newsletter back then about Reagan's lies, and it later became one about Dan Quayle. And
it never helped. It never helped. I mean, when Reagan was in that debate with Mondale, and Mondale made a really brilliant point in '84, Reagan just looked at the camera and he said, "That's pretty good for a younger man."
Right.
That was the end of it.
Yeah.
And look at what happened with the New York Times thing that they did 2 years of research about Trump's father, about the entire criminal family, documented, detailed. They even printed it twice in a week. Dismissed in one word by Trump, and they just stopped.
Right.
The reporters stopped.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Dr. Justin Frank, his new book, Trump on the Couch. Dr. Frank, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you.
It's always great talking with you. It's always informative talking with you.
I love it.
Thank you, sir.
I love it.
Thank you, sir. Check and the book again, Trump on the Couch. You can tweet him at Justin Frank MD, and the website is ObamaOnTheCouch.com. His next most recent book.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. Excuse me, take you off a speaker.
Thank you, David.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine.
Tom, that was a fascinating interview you did with the psychologist. And this thing with the familiarity of the baby, with the face gazing down on the baby, the similarity, and if it's a difference, and it frightens the baby.
Yeah.
This goes to patriarchy, and I submit to you, Tom, that what is going on with Trump, Bush, and a assorted variety of these other fear peddlers. Imagine this as the father looking in on this child, and it's exciting the child to its fear, right? I would submit to you that this issue here with Trump, Bush, and the sort of variety of these other people is the issue of something to which needs to be analyzed in the context of a sociological phenomenon with white people, right? Because these things are being, I would hate to be on the receiving end and susceptible to what Fox and right-wing radio and internet is directing at them, right? I would hate to be a recipient of that.
Oh, they're living in terror. That's why they're so vulnerable to these kinds of lies.
Exactly. And so it's like, I think this is the task of someone who has the personality of that of a Roosevelt, which has to be white, right? Because unless there is...
David, I'm not sure that's true. I think President Obama talked the way that Dr. Frank said, we need somebody talking. And we responded. I mean, there was outside of the crazy right-wingers, I think America was very reassured by Obama.
But if you don't mind, though, Tom, I think there was a pushback on that, and that's fear element.
A racially based one, yeah.
Sir?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that there was a pushback on that, and even a kindling of the distrust of Obama, wherein it made possible a Trump, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have Trump, who is that familiar face, feeding back into that which they are comfortable with. Well, you understand where I'm coming from?
I do. I mean, I think we're both saying in different ways that Justin Frank's comment that if when you're 8 months old, if you look at somebody who doesn't look like mom and dad, it scares you. I think that's the basis of the visceral biological basis of racism.
Yeah, and so this is what's feeding, and which is causing this problem with white people, because we as black people, we're not susceptible to all of this nonsense that Fox and right-wing radio and internet is feeding to the general population. And it is safe to say that 95% of the people in the Republican Party are white and are corporate. And herein lies the dig and the problem, because corporate likes the status quo, right?
Yeah. And so does white, by the way, because, white privilege is what it is. David, I'm sorry we're hitting the end of the break here, but your points were very well made, and I absolutely agree. And not just in regards to Trump, but in regards to cop killing and racism and everything else, the white community needs to wake up and stand up. And hopefully this is helping this conversation. Welcome back. By the way, we were talking about the drug situation, and this is so bizarre. The Republicans pass a law making it, forcing us to buy drugs from companies who sell them to us from pharmacies in the United States, even though 80% of them are manufactured in China or India. And then, which is bizarre, and then Congressman Tom Reed, a Republican from New York, he starts a debt collection agency that harasses people for medical debt, in many cases that they never incurred. You can read about this over at The Intercept. He's now saying, well, I don't own that company anymore, but it turns out his wife does. And, you know, for 2 decades, this guy's been making money, you know, harassing poor people through his debt collection company. And now he wants to get reelected as a Republican congressman from New York. It's just amazing. Richard in Chicago. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Well, when I look at fear of the other, fear of a stranger, I mean, is there not any way to say that that's valid? I mean, if I allowed my son to have his friends move into my house, and then another one moves into my house, and they don't respect anything in my house, then they move in 5 or 6 more of their family members into my home. Is it some kind of a phobia that I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is my home that we have welcomed you into, and now you have taken absolute no respect and dished it out to me. This is how
You're sounding like Laura Ingraham on Fox talking about people from Mexico. Is that what you're trying to say, Richard? Is that the analogy you're trying to draw?
No, I want people to come to America and understand American freedom. Why America is
why do you think they're coming to America, Richard? They're not eligible for any kind of government benefits. They're coming here because they want to work and they want to be Americans. Now, you know, we have to regulate that. We have to have rational immigration control. You can't just have, you know, the open borders that Republicans constantly say Democrats want, which is a complete lie. You know, that's insane. The only people who are in favor of open borders are Ron Paul, his daddy, and the other libertarians who believe that, you know, national borders are an anachronism. And they're all Republicans, by the way. There are no Democrats who are suggesting that.
My mother was an immigrant. My mother, so, you know, I'm second generation here, first generation to say. Her family was not allowed to come in. She was the only one that was allowed in Ellis Island in the 20s.
Right.
And she was the only one, late 20s. That's it. And the other ones had to go back. I don't look back at that and say that was some kind of hatred, that was some kind of phobia. That's the laws, that you have to qualify. That's why when you see 7,000, 9,000, 15, 20,000 people demanding to be let into the United States of America.
No, they're not, Richard. They're not demanding to be let into the United States. They intend to appeal for asylum. And we have laws in this country, in addition to international treaties, that say, you know, if somebody comes to this country with a legitimate fear that they will be killed in their home country, that there's a judicial process to determine if they can come into the United States. And historically, we've taken about 100,000 asylum seekers a year. The Trump administration wants to cut that down to 30,000. These people are coming to the border asking to be put in line for that process. That's it.
The ones being interviewed by CNN just want jobs. I didn't hear one of them, and CNN is running like a nonstop, like they're traveling with them.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I just want a better job. I need money for my family.
If somebody comes to our border and says, I'm just here because I want a better job, they're going to be turned away. You know, the last so-called caravan that showed up, I mean, you know, 14 people got arrested, and you know, most of them got turned away. Some were, you know, they said, hey, you're a legitimate asylum seeker. These people, many of these people actually are legitimate asylum seekers. Reagan so screwed up Central America in his war against socialism, funding the Contras, that you've got 3 dysfunctional governments down there that are now at war with their own people. Richard, you know, have a heart here. Have some consideration for other humans.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
reading today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club from my old friend Armin Lehmann's book, the late Armin Lehmann. The book is titled In Hitler's Bunker, a boy soldier's eyewitness account of the Fuhrer's last days. My friend Armin was the man who gave the 16-year-old who gave the bad news to Hitler, and then he watched as Hitler walked into the room and committed suicide. It opens with an introduction from Arthur Axmann, the leader of the Hitler Youth, in April of '45. There's only victory or annihilation. Know no bounds in your hatred of the enemy. It is your duty to watch when others tire, to stand when others weaken. Your greatest honor is your unshakable fidelity to Adolf Hitler. It was with words such as these that the Third Reich's Hitler Youth leader, Arthur Axmann, exhorted 10-year-old boys and girls being sworn into the Hitler Youth in Berlin on the eve of Adolf Hitler's last birthday. The children were being inducted into the junior echelons of the movement, the Jungvolk, the young folk, and the Jungmadel, the young maidens. I was looking on, then age 16, a member of the Hitler Youth Volkssturm, literally People's Storm. The Volkssturm was the home defense force of old men and young boys hastily assembled in the dying days of the war. Every able-bodied male between the ages of 16 and 55 was ordered to put on whatever uniform he could find, anything from postmen's uniforms to firefighters' uniforms, and fight for the fatherland. The Russians called us totals because we were the result of total war. The Wehrmacht called us stew because we were a mixture of old meat and green vegetables. However, I had recently distinguished myself in battle and had even been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. The Hitler Youth leader, Arthur Axmann, at 32, was the youngest of the senior Nazis around Hitler, but his influence within Hitler's inner circle was growing daily toward the end of the war, as he pledged that the Hitler Youth movement would fight to the death for the Führer and the fatherland. In Hitler's last days, Axmann was one of only a handful of Nazis, including Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann and the cynical propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, who enjoyed the Führer's absolute trust and confidence. Axmann had personally selected me to present to Hitler on the occasion of his 56th birthday at a ceremony in the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, partly because of my recent distinction in fighting the Russians, but partly, I suspect, because my role in the Hitler Youth Unit was as a courier, a melder. Hitler had won his Iron Cross as a courier in the First World War. I think that Axmann saw that as a lucky sign of some sort. At that moment, our Führer could do with every bit of luck he could get. As I watched Axmann, I did not realize it, but victory for the Allies was no longer in doubt. Germany was being overrun from every direction. City after city was being turned into ash under a ferocious Allied bombing campaign, unprecedented in its intensity. I, along with several hundred other teenage soldiers of the Hitler Youth Volkssturm, was among the last who would serve Hitler's regime in Berlin, in the much vaulted citadel of the Führer's last redoubt, in the dying days of the war. I didn't know it at the time, but I would soon be serving as a courier in his bunker beneath the Chancellery. It was an experience that would bring me into contact with some of the most notorious Nazis of the time, as well as some of the most decent soldiers and civilians struggling to cope with the death wish Hitler had imposed upon all Germans. Facing total defeat, the Führer was now willing to sacrifice everything and everybody, including even the youngest and most innocent of German lives. It wasn't just males either. The Bund Deutscher Model, the German Girls' Legion, or BDM, was the female section of the Hitler Youth. They too sacrificed their lives for the Führer. I did not realize at the time that Germany faced total defeat. I still believed in the myth of our, quote, miracle weapons that was widely circulated before the end of the war. I had no comprehension of the sheer evil that was at the heart of the Nazi regime. Yet I was prepared to lay down my life for Hitler in defense of the fatherland and the noble ideals of the National Socialist movement. I was elated at the prospect of greeting Hitler the following morning on his 56th and last birthday. To comprehend why anybody can have been so thoroughly taken in by such a deception, one must understand a little about my background. I was 4 years old when Adolf Hitler became Reich Chancellor of a coalition cabinet in Germany. It was 30 January 1933. Later, that historic date became known as Die Machtergreifung, the seizure of might. Absolute power, as Hitler has taught us, often brings about primal chaos. But in Hitler's case, it went beyond that. His absolute control over the minds of countless individuals created a living hell that destroyed the lives of millions of people in a human catastrophe too enormous to comprehend. It wasn't like that in the beginning. It all started with promises of a better life. My grandfather, for example, an old guard Nazi Party member and an early follower of Hitler, was convinced that a fast economic recovery would come about because of Hitler. It did. He was also sure that Germany would be avenged for the Treaty of Versailles. It was. My father believed in Hitler as well. He not only became a member of the National Socialist Workers' Party, as thousands did, and joined the SS, he also turned into a fanatical disciple of what he looked upon as the new order needed to restore Germany to the glory it deserved. My father was an authoritarian, so perhaps it's understandable that he admired the new regime. But my mother was as loving and caring a soul as you could possibly imagine, and she too admired Adolf Hitler. She too thought Adolf Hitler had been anointed by God to lead Germany to its historic destiny as the greatest nation on earth. Most Germans did. It may come as a shock or a mild surprise, but women were among Hitler's most ardent followers in Hitler's bunker. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the previous hour, Dr. Justin Frank was here talking about how do we combat fear when it's used as a political weapon. And, you know, his main advice was to do what Andrew Gillum has done down in Florida, the man who's running for governor of Florida. Trump has attacked him, and he has not attacked back. Instead, he said, you know, my grandmother taught me never wrestle with a pig. You just get all dirty, and the pig likes it. And so he's not going to wrestle with Donald Trump, and Dr. Frank, the professor of psychiatry, he's a psychiatrist himself, and has this new book out, Trump on the Couch. He said that's the way to deal with Trump, is to ignore him. He does his rallies because he needs constant affirmation. He needs constant stroking. And he views even negative press as a form of stroking. And that's why he attacks the press, so that he gets more of it, right? So, you know, I want to talk a little bit more about fear here in this second hour, and we'll continue with you know, what we talked about with regard to the drug situation, pharmaceutical situation. Evan Greer will be with us in about 10 minutes to talk about the latest news on net neutrality. Terry McAuliffe will be with us in our third hour, and Angela Baca is going to be back with us to talk about the state of pot around the country. But this. And by the way, my new book, it'll be out next June. It's going to be titled, and we did a survey with you to come up with a title, a SurveyMonkey survey. It's going to be titled The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. And we're now doing a survey for what do you think is the best cover. My personal preference is the one that looks kind of old, where the title pops right out and it's got the really scary guns in it. But there's 3 or 4 samples. It's on a SurveyMonkey again, and we'd love to get your opinion. Louise just posted it on our Facebook page. I think she's probably tweeted it out too. So it should be easy to find in our social media. I'm not sure if it's on our website or not right now, but please check that out. But anyhow, this, you know, as I pointed out, in 1980, Ronald Reagan took the presidency by committing treason, by having his, you know, Bill Casey, his campaign manager, reach out to the mullahs and say, you hold the hostages until after the election, and we'll sell you spare parts and munitions for your American-made militia that the Shah, you know, bought from us. And that got him elected, that treason, just like Nixon's treason in '68, you know, blowing up LBJ's deal with South Vietnam and North Vietnam, got him elected. So, you know, Reagan gets in that way, and but, you know, they start rolling out these, quote, new Republican ideas from think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, and you know, which brought us, what, giant tax cuts for billionaires. I mean, that was pretty much it, right? And so when George Herbert Walker Bush ran for president, he had nothing to sell but fear, and he did that with Willie Horton, and it worked. Willie Horton scared the hell out of white people. And you know, a majority of white people voted Republican in 1988. In fact, a majority of white people have voted Republican in every presidential election since 1964. And that's because in 65, Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act. I mean, you know, it's just been nonstop fear. So anyhow, Willie Horton in 88. And then, you know, again, George W. Bush became president illegitimately by voter suppression, you know, election fraud his brother committed, along with Katherine Harris down in Florida, suppressing the vote of 60 to 90,000 African Americans. And then and then it still wasn't close enough. They needed the Supreme Court to hand him the decision. And what did he do when he ran for re-election in 2004? He used fear. Here's a clip from the Republican National Convention. It's, you know, cobbled together from all these different speakers. The sound starts out with Bush, and then it goes to somebody else, and then it goes to Cheney, and then you got Laura Bush in there. And but you know, this is just a clip. There's I think 2 minutes of it. We'll just play little bits and pieces of it from 2004.
In the heart of this great city, we saw tragedy arrive on a quiet morning. September the 11th. September the 11th. September the 11th.
September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
I mean, it's like a totem, right? It's like their sacred animal. September 11th, 9/11. Right. This is the 2004 Republican National Convention. They're not talking about, you know, we're going to save Social Security or we want to, you know, promote education across America. Instead, this is what they were talking about.
Saddam
Hussein.
War and danger. Continuing danger.
It's all fear. It's activating that fear response in us. Dr. Frank pointed out that when we're 8 months old, that's the point at which we start to notice faces that don't look like mom and dad and freak out. And this is like the biological basis of racism. And of course, racism is being used to, again, incite fear in white people.
Deadly technologies.
Radical ideology of hate.
Terror of threats.
Those brown Muslims.
Terror. War on terrorism. War against terrorism.
Right. I mean, this was the 2004 Republican Convention. They're doing the same thing now. This is what Trump is still doing. Right? Only now, instead of it's those terrorists over there, it's those terrorists coming from south of the border, right? You know, Guatemala actually has a 97% vaccination rate. We have a 92% vaccination rate in the United States. It's less likely that those children coming from Guatemala are carrying disease than the kids in American schools have diseases. And yet you've got Fox News talking about them as vermin and infestations. I mean, this is pathetic. I lack adjectives. But the simple and fundamental reality is that the Republican Party has campaigned on fear, they have promoted with fear, and they have governed with fear literally since Reagan's presidency, because that's all they have. They're a one-trick pony. Tax cuts for billionaires and the rich. And we'll throw a few bones to working people and small businesses. That's all they have. So how do we respond to the fear? Justin Frank says, don't engage in it. Ridicule it. David in San Francisco, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, hi, Tom. You know, it's I keep pushing that people study old Roy Cohn because he was very involved in the technique with Joe McCarthy.
Right, he was Joe McCarthy's right-hand man, and he was Donald Trump's mentor.
Right, and mentor to Manafort and Stone.
Right.
So, and in fact, he was the uncle of Dick Morris. But these people have been pushing this junk for a lot longer than Roy Cohn. I was going to give two examples for this campaign season. Up in North Dakota, I think they have an Amendment 1 that's going to offer the ability for the state of North Dakota to get an ethics commission. And you should hear hate radio, fear radio, talking about how bad Amendment 1 is. They sure can't have an ethics commission. And the other one, out here in California, Proposition 10 for the whole state is designed to get rid of big government's demand to control rent control. And apparently the right wing are urging remaining tied to big government. In other words, back in 1995, some lousy legislation came out of the state capitol here that said that rent control was against the law. By mandate from the state legislature, no city in California could develop a rent control. And so now, when housing prices have gotten so insane that hyperinflation is real, the attempt to get rent control back into the hands of every state and county, man, you should hear them. And they're talking as if God itself says that rent control is a tool of Satan and any other abnormal.
No, this is happening all over the country. I mean, you know, we've got a ballot proposal. We've got a ballot proposal here in Washington, or there's one in Washington State across the river to tax carbon, right? And my God, they're all over TV going, "This is going to cost you billions," and you know, I mean, it's just amazing the use of fear. David, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 15 and a half minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. Evan Greer is going to check in with us on the state of net neutrality. We'll have that conversation right after this. And welcome back. Don in Shoreline, Washington. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I think the only way to combat fear is through love and compassion instead of hating and fearing the people through some existential fear or whatever. Try to find it in your heart. We need to look to our hearts and to the good Lord above to put his love in our hearts. That, I guarantee, will conquer all fear and whatnot, and his peace. And, of course, I'm reminded of the words of FDR and Harry Truman, Dr. King. We need speakers like that on a national basis to regularly remind us that, once again, there's nothing to fear but fear itself.
It seems like Andrew Gillum in Florida, Beto O'Rourke in Texas, they have, and you know, there's a few others out there who are, but those two are the most high profile right now. And Stacey Abrams in Georgia, they're all embracing a message that's a variation on that, Don. And I think that we'll see, you know, whether it's electorally successful, you know, given how rigged the elections are, given all the voter suppression, particularly in the states in which they're running. But I think you're right. I think you nailed it. Don, thanks for the call. Mark in San Jose, California, watching us on Free Speech. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I was going to talk about media ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was a teacher, and I had and your fear was interesting about from Reagan and how propaganda from right-wing lawyers moved us to fearing the caravan 2 months away and describing patriotism as kneeling and your opponent locked up is something, is something illegal. So, in my job, I do basketball players, and I say that your uniform is showing democracy because everybody's got the very same uniform, and that's from kindergarten to pros, and they takes laws and that to make that right. And,
yeah, it's why some schools have dress codes. School uniforms, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah. And also automobiles, you know, for those red states too, you know, they have tons of rules and regulations to make those cars correct. And so, yeah, so we can talk about laws.
Well, and we know from you know, the exploding Pintos or Chevettes or whatever it was that and the side saddle trucks, you know, that GM was making, I believe it was, might have been Ford. No, it was Chevy. Yeah, it was General Motors. That Ralph Nader went after back in the 70s. That, you know, companies, if they can save a few dollars and it costs people's lives, that's fine with them. You know, as long as they don't get caught.
Right.
Or held
we
to
let
account.
corporations light laws, you know, and like you talk about with, you know, Osama bin Laden got what he wanted, creating fear in this country and breaking it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stories, but I think it's all with this media that's been our teacher. And that's propaganda getting not better but worse. And so we just need to be critical thinkers and call them lawyers and know that media is with the right-wingers, and the right-wing lawyers is our choice for the young people. That's your choice for your future. Right-wing lawyers are Democratic. And thank you for listening, Tom.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. Point well made. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in with Evan Greer and find out what is the state of net neutrality in America. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Evan Greer and find out what's going on with the state of this. Evan is the campaign director at Fight for the Future and an internationally touring musician and speaker. She writes regularly for The Guardian, Time, Newsweek, etc. Fightforthefuture.org is the website, and Evan_Greer is the Twitter handle. Evan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back on, Tom.
I have a quick question for you before we get into this stuff, because you are technologically savvy as well as familiar with politics and the law. I have noticed over the last, we have Comcast in my home and as our internet provider here in the studio, and I've noticed over the last couple of months, maybe 3 months or so, that my computers are just getting slower and slower and slower. And at first I thought, you know, maybe I had malware or a virus, or, you know, the Russians or the CIA hacked me or something. And we picked up an advertiser who sells VPN services. It's called ExpressVPN. And they've got a product where you can actually install their VPN on the flash drive in your router at home. So every computer in your home is now, you know, going through a VPN tunnel, and Comcast can no longer see what I'm doing online. And my internet speeds have just gone up dramatically as a result of that. Does that mean that Comcast somehow I pushed the wrong button here. Sorry, Evan. Does that mean that Comcast has somehow been monitoring all my keystrokes and stuff, and that's why my computers have slowed down? Or is this, you know, new operating systems that are more complex, or I've been hacked?
Well, I'm not sure I can diagnose the computer problem here over the phone, Tom, but, you know, what I will say is that, you know, a VPN, which, you know, is a great privacy tool that it sounds like you're employing, is actually something that also can respond to other types of interference from internet service providers. And while, you know, it's always difficult to tell on a kind of case-by-case basis, you know, what may be happening. What we do know is that in a broad way, The fact that there's so little competition in the U.S. high-speed internet market means that companies like Comcast and Verizon and AT&T and others do have a tremendous amount of control over what we see and do on the internet, and also a tremendous incentive to manipulate what we see and do on the internet.
So they might have just been throttling my content?
Well, it's possible, and there have been measured studies, recently, especially that have caught the providers throttling video or lowering the resolution of video on mobile and different things like that. The reality is that there's likely not kind of very targeted throttling or censorship going on from the providers, particularly because there's such a strong movement, that's watching for that type of thing.
Right. So let's get to the movement.
The fact that we have, the fact that we have now legislation in California, even, it's going through judicial review or litigation, but, having those laws, that law on the books there, having the courts, cases going through the court, having legislation springing up in dozens of other states, as well as the Congressional Review Act effort, with a big final push on that coming up on the deadline as this Congress goes out at the end of the year. These companies they know that the world is sort of watching them, and that's the only thing right now keeping them in line, since the FCC essentially abdicated its responsibility to provide oversight for them under Ajit Pai's leadership back in December. So that's sort of the state of where things are there.
So the CRA, the Congressional, what's the phrase stand for again?
Congressional Review Act.
Review Act, thank you. The Congressional Review Act will, Congress has the authority to oversee the executive branch agencies' behavior. And Congress can say, what Ajit Pai did is wrong. We're just going to, that's it. And it reverses what he did. And what's the state of that? What's the state of that legislation?
So this legislation passed the Senate, with strong bipartisan support. It was a tremendous upset and a huge victory for the internet freedom movement. It's now kind of been stalling out in the House. There are more than 170 representatives that have signed on to a discharge petition, which would force a vote on this resolution. Internet activists are pushing really hard on key representatives ahead of the election. This is clearly going to be an issue in the midterm elections, whether, politicians or tech journalists like it or not. I can tell you just anecdotally, Fight for the Future's more than 2 million members. We hear from them all the time. And I can't tell you how many people I know are out there who are planning to vote, considering where representatives and candidates stand on net neutrality. It's a huge issue. It's an issue that reaches across the aisle. Polls strongly show that Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, everyone can agree we don't want our cable companies controlling what websites we use, what apps we use, how we get our news, information about the world. We want the entire internet, not an internet that's watered down and manipulated by companies in the interest of profit.
Amen.
So this is one thing that's, really bringing people together, and we have a real chance to fight on it before this Congress goes out during the lame duck session. That'll be our chance to push for the CRA, and that's why, we're organizing right now around it.
That's great. So call your representative and ask if they support the Congressional Review Act with regard to net neutrality. And fightforthefuture.org is the website. Evan, thanks a lot for being with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. And I'll quickly shout out that along with Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello and actress Evangeline Lilly and a bunch of other celebrities, we launched a major crowdfunding campaign today for the net neutrality effort at donatefornetneutrality.com.
Cool. Thank you. Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals the truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Sure. Welcome back. Let's check out geeky science here for a moment. We have less time than we thought. This is the headline over in Common Dreams. Alarming new study shows oceans have retained far more heat than previously believed. I was talking with Lila Connors, who's producing this movie for HBO about the climate that we're going to debut in Norway in January, rather. And she was talking about these lakes in Alaska that are literally bubbling with methane because it's warming. But the oceans themselves are warming. There's a new research that was published in the journal Nature on Wednesday that shows that the Earth's oceans have retained 60% more heat each year over the past 25 years than scientists previously believed. Michael Brun of the Sierra Club, he said, this global crisis demands nothing less than swift and meaningful action. If our oceans warm up much more, there are hundreds of billions of tons of frozen methane under the sea. And if that stuff is mobilized into the atmosphere, it's game over for civilization and maybe for humans. I mean, that is, and we were talking about fear earlier. There are legitimate concerns, shall we say, even fears, and illegitimate fears. It is an illegitimate fear to sell terror about a couple thousand, mostly women and children, who are desperately walking 1,000 miles to the United States in hope of saving their lives in many cases, or finding a better life. That's an irrational fear. We're not that small. We're not that terrified. We're not that tiny. We're not that pathetic. But a rational fear, a rational concern is the fossil fuel billionaires are destroying our planet, and we got to do something about that. The truth is always a useful thing, by the way, as Nick would like to point out. Nick in Yorkville, Illinois. Hey, Nick, thanks for listening to CPT. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Well, I noticed something that you guys you mentioned earlier. Well, actually, what the doctor mentioned on the call was ignoring this stuff. But
Nick, can you get a little closer to your microphone? It's hard to hear you.
Is that better? These smartphones don't seem to make good calls. Is that any better?
Yeah. Okay.
Do everything but.
To the point.
So the point was, the doctor said to ignore all the falseness, and with the caveat of perhaps even adding interjecting some truth, knocking down the false statements. I got a mailer hung on my door about vote for Republicans, and not one of the things on there was an actual fact. It was all, or anything that they had done. Everything was the Democrats are going to do this, this, or this, or this.
Right. Nancy Pelosi, immigrants, and oh my God.
Yeah, in Illinois, they're bringing up Nancy Pelosi. She's in California. So
right.
What? Yeah. Come on, people. But an acronym for fear that I had heard long ago and helped me out quite a few times was it's a false emotion about reality. Again, it's based on nothing.
Yeah.
And it's
well, not always, but generally. I mean, fear is, we have fear for a legitimate purpose. If a saber-toothed tiger is going to take you down, being afraid will make you run. If a guy sticks a gun in your face, fear is an appropriate response. But this irrational fear is what the Republican Party has been selling since Nixon started it, the irrational fear that white people have of black people. And the whole war on drugs, these irrational fears. But I get your point, and that's a great acronym, Nick. Thanks a lot for that. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's up?
Good morning. So I have this humorous anecdote that would both solve our climate problem and our energy problem.
Okay.
And I haven't worked out the technical details yet. That's for somebody who's smarter than me. But here's the concept. If we can figure out a way to run our cars and trucks on fear. You follow me?
On fear, right.
That's the best I got. Oh, and
well, here's something for you, Maverick. I've got I very publicly on the air talked about, I had to buy a new car, and I've got a plug-in Prius. And so if I was to take my exercise bicycle downstairs and put a generator on it so I could generate my own electricity, and then run that output to my car so I could charge my car. What fear does is it produces cortisol and adrenaline, the hormones, and they make you run faster, right? And one of the best ways to respond to them is to burn it up physically. Fear is designed to make you run away from the saber-toothed tiger. So I could actually be using fear to power my car. There you go.
You've already improved on my idea.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey, real quick, Rick Steve did a show last week on the rise of fascism in Europe. It was pretty good.
Who's Rick?
Rick Steve.
Yeah, I don't know who he is.
He's the travel guy. Does all those wonderful travel shows.
What network?
In Europe. Generally, it's on PBS.
On PBS. Okay, cool. I'll have to check it out. Maverick, thanks for the tip, and thanks for the idea. That's a good one. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk about fear and specifically agree with several of your points you were going after, namely Andrew Gillum. It kind of really does help when you're running a real man against a pathetic little worm like DeSantis. And I think the thing with Trump that we need to understand is that you're not going to get facts through to Trump. You're not going to get facts through to the Trump voter. But what you can do is satire. All we can do, because we're out of power, is just make fun of their ideas. Their ideas are so laughable and insane, like the idea that the reason our economy has been stagnant and wages haven't increased in the last 40 years is because of this grand conspiracy of undocumented immigrants who have literally no control in our society, haven't been able to unionize, and generally have been exploited by the capitalist class. Is totally unbelievably laughable if you frame it like that.
No, they're the victims of Reaganomics just like all the rest of us, and Reagan's war on unions and everything else.
Exactly. And that's the main reason why they don't want to have them become documented, because then they'll start unionizing, and then it's like, oh, wait, we don't want that.
Right.
And, it's just this mythical thinking, as Chris Hedges points out. It's always about a glorious past that never existed,
Yeah.
And
that's the key to the fascist sales pitch.
Exactly. And in fact, I watched a good documentary about Apocalypse Hitler, and the newspapers at the time were comparing Hitler to the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, and he basically wanted to return them to basically barbarians. And that's how we need to talk about the Trump voters. They're barbarians. They want to return us back to savagery. The times when not only you didn't have health care, you get murdered, you get raped, you get killed.
Yeah. I get it. And combat fear with health care, combat fear with love, combat fear with and combat fear mongers like Trump by ignoring them or ridiculing them. I got it, and I'm with you. Jared, thank you. Roxanne in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You had some thoughts?
Hi, yes, also on the fear issue. A while back, there was a similar discussion on your show, and one of the points that was made was that probably the best thing that we could all do is, as a first step, is don't self-censor. And I think it's real easy to fall into that, not to want to make waves and not to want to stick out. I've caught myself on several occasions. But, I think we are really in a fight against totalitarianism here that is every bit as existential for us as our fight in World War II. But it takes a different kind of courage. It's a different kind of battle. It's going on a lot longer. We are, in some ways, a lot more comfortable. But it's just as important, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There's somebody tweeted on, you find it on my Twitter timeline or whatever you call it on the Twitter feed. I didn't retweet it, but it was tweeted to me, so you could find it there. A copy, and I probably should have retweeted it, and I still can't. It was a copy of a handwritten letter that this woman was on a plane. She was flying out to Los Angeles to be with her family. She's Jewish. She was frightened by what happened in Pennsylvania, and she wanted to be with her family. And there was this guy sitting ahead of her on the plane wearing a red MAGA hat. And so she wrote him this very sweet letter saying, I am scared for my life because of the rhetoric of Donald Trump, and your hat frightens me too. This whole thing. I mean, please dial it back or something like that. I'd have to. The letter was just so elegant, but that's what's going on, Roxanne, is people are starting to speak out and not censor themselves. And she didn't. She handed him the letter after she took a picture of it.
That's terrific. I'm actually of results, and the things that I hold on to often is a quote from somebody in results, and it is, "Action breeds inspiration."
Bingo. Yeah. Very, very, very well said. Roxanne, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back in about 4 minutes here. We're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. So stick around for that. And then at the top of the next hour, we're going to check in with Terry McAuliffe. That's going to be entertaining. So stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Terry, of course, the former head of the DNC and more recently the governor of Virginia. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Bill in Sun City, Arizona, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I know how to defend ourselves against fear.
Or fear mongers is, I think, more specifically what we're talking about. Go for it.
One word: organize.
Yeah.
But we have to organize, Tom, in such a way that it's visible to each other. Let me tell you just a little about me. Years ago, when Bush was elected, on the radio station here in Phoenix, the question most asked was, how do we get other people to talk to us? I invented something I call the 3-cent solution. It's simple. It's a small square, thumbnail-sized piece of orange felt that I safety pinned over my heart space. People would look at me and they'd point to their own heart space and they'd say to me, "What's that?" Mm-hmm. And I'd say, "I'm glad you asked." At the time, I was saying to people, "Do you know who Cindy Sheehan is?" But if we could all do something like that, that made us visibly aware of each other,
right?
That we were all standing together, it would grow, it would grow, it would grow, it would grow, it would grow.
Yeah, on the other side, that's what the people with the MAGA hats are doing. You know, they're advertising, they're reaching out to their peeps.
My small piece of felt doesn't say anything, Tom.
Right.
Doesn't make a declaration. It just opens up the conversation. And to people that are aware of what it is, that become aware of what it is, it's an organizing principle. It's worked for me for years. I've been able to inform people about things they didn't know for 17, 18 years now that I've been doing it.
Simply because that piece of felt that you safety pin over your heart on your shirt causes them to say, "What's that?"
What's that?
It's like a starting point for conversation. That's fascinating. So over the years,
an organizing principle. If we all did it, you know what makes an army is a uniform. That would be the uniform thing for what I call the peace army.
Yeah. So over the years since you've been doing this, you said you've been doing it 17 years, Bill. How have your topics changed?
Well, in the beginning, I talked to people about Cindy Sheen.
Mm-hmm.
Then it moved on to Citizens United and other topics of the day. I could use any topic of the day, especially today where there are so many.
Yeah.
But when you get people to confront you, and I love it that they point to their own heart before asking me a question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, point to your heart. You can ask me any question in the world.
Right.
It's just a beautiful organizing principle that I've been doing for years.
It's like,
and I'm never going to stop.
It's like empathy. That's marvelous. That's absolutely marvelous. Bill, thanks for sharing that story with us. That's a great one. I really like that. By the way, I'd wanted to share this with you, and time just kind of got away with me, and I've got about 40 seconds here, so this is a quick one. Dean Heller is running for re-election, the Republican from the Senate in Nevada against Jackie Rosen, the Democrat. And basically, he's running saying that, don't worry about Yucca Mountain. It's not going to happen. You know, the whole country is not going to dump their nuclear waste here in Nevada. Well, Rick Perry just admitted, this is amazing. Rick Perry just admitted that the administration, this was last Friday, still supports building the Yucca Mountain nuclear waste site outside of Las Vegas. And Dean Heller is like, oops, you weren't supposed to say that. You know, as Bloomberg said, or John Ralston said on Bloomberg, poor Rick Perry didn't get the memo and accidentally told the truth. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills. Through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's just read a live read for our commercial stations for Muse. I'm so pleased to be promoting this meditation device. Choose Muse, M-U-S-E, CHOOSE-MUSE.com is their website. And I think we all need to, you know, down-regulate ourselves a little bit, and you know, in these times of hysteria, really, that Donald Trump is trying to promote. So anyhow, let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Alan Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, former Ohio Congressman Bob Ney. Hey, Bob, welcome back.
Hello. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am great, but I'll get better. And I hope the same is true for you. What's in the news?
Well, send me. I'm going to buy one of those devices or whatever you do. I need one.
Yeah, choosemuse.com is the way. It's serious. They got some amazing science there. I mean, just all. I believe it. And I've been using it for months now, and it really has helped. And I've been meditating since I was 17 years old, and it has helped my meditation practice. Anyhow, what's in the news?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you sit with the Dalai Lama. I mean, you go to India to meditate. You're going to love this thing, Bob.
The monks that study it for 25 years, it works.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, to the news.
Maybe we ought to send some to John Bolton, because he's in the news today.
Okay.
But let me start first with the potential new pick for the Ambassador to the United Nations, Heather Nauert, and she is the State Department spokesperson.
Is that with a K or a G?
That's with Heather Nauert, N-A-U-E-R-T.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Heather Nauert.
Yep.
She is formerly of Fox News, went from Fox News reporting to the State Department as a spokesperson, and she was previously, I think my memory serves me right, Tom, she was with ABC News for a bit. she's had a history of journalism. She has had no history of, dealing with international affairs.
So she's not a diplomat. She's a Fox News talking head.
Correct.
And that's who's going to represent us in the United Nations. This is not good.
Absolutely. And it's well known that she, by the way, she met President Trump on Monday, has kept a low profile about it. He loves her daily briefings, watches, the briefings whenever they have them, and so that's his pick. She has basically, with the exception of being a spokesperson for the United Nations, zero experience internationally, period.
Wow.
So that's going to probably be his pick after the midterm elections for Ambassador UN. See what happens with the, approval. Yeah. National Security Advisor John Bolton is giving a speech as we speak, and it's in Miami, and he is going to give the positive sign for the new right-wing firebrand Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil as positive sign. That will be a positive sign. And if we look at his history, he has had numerous homophobic, sexist remarks. This is not Bolton, but this is Bolsonaro.
Right.
And he's fond of military rule, and he is an ally in fighting, advancing the rule of law, increased security and prosperity. So Bolton is hitching his horse to that wagon.
Well, this is amazing. Here are some actual quotes from Bolsonaro. He says, the situation of this country would be better today if the dictatorship had killed more people. He said Pinochet should have killed more people. There's a separate quote. He said, I have 5 children. 4 were boys. On the 5th, I got weak, and we had a daughter. Speaking of the opposition party, it's called PT down there. It's like the Democratic Party here. He said, let's shoot all the PT members in Accra, which is a Brazilian state. He said, my advice, and I do it, I cheat on my taxes as much as possible. If I don't need to pay anything, I don't pay. He said, there's not the least doubt I'd organize a coup on the same day in response to what he would do if he was elected president. He said, if your son begins to act like this sort of gay, he deserves a smack. He said, I'm favorable to torture. You know this. I mean, I've got 5 pages of quotes from this guy here. This is one scary dude. He is like Duterte.
Oh, exactly. And then, of course, Bolton went to the other side, and he says, well, Latin America, he denounced Cuba, which we reestablished relationship with, of course, Venezuela and Nicaragua as the troika of tyranny, but he praises the gentleman that you just gave all the quotes for. Of course, because it's John Bolton, and that's what he does.
Yeah.
There is a global walkout of Google employees who are walking out because of payments to top CEOs who've been accused of sexual harassment, and because of Google's policy on dealing with sexual harassment. But they are also staging this worldwide in support of other tech companies where there is a turning of the head of sexual harassment. So it was worldwide that Google employees did this.
Wow.
Which is, I think, pretty good. Yeah. And then I'm sure you've all and your callers have connected all of the dots of what I call Border Week, because this is coming to the end of midterm elections. And DHS, of course, the ad that came out, which was Luis Bracamonte featured in the ad, where at the bottom it said, Democrats let him into our country, Democrats let him stay, the explosive ad.
Neither of those statements being true, by the way.
Right. Well, yeah, because he was arrested. This man was arrested twice.
Well, under rules that were established by Ronald Reagan. That was the last major immigration reform.
Yeah. But this is the attempt, as you know, for the midterm elections, because a lot of other things did not work.
Yeah. So it's be afraid, all the time, be afraid. It's amazing. Bob, it's always great talking with you. Thanks a lot for dropping by today. Bob Ney, author of Sideswiped with Talk Media News. We're going to be checking in with Terry McAuliffe right after the break. Stick around. This is going to get interesting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Today we're reading from Standoff, How America Became Ungovernable by Bill Schneider. This is from the first chapter, titled Old America versus New America. On November 8th, 2016, American voters did an astonishing thing. They elected a president of the United States who most voters, 61%, did not think was qualified to serve as president. How did that happen? How did we get from John F. Kennedy to Donald J. Trump? A little more than 50 years ago, the United States started on a great political journey in two opposite directions, part of the country to the right and part of the country to the left. This is the story of where we are now and how we got here. It's the story of the country's journey and my own personal journey as I covered it. It's the story of two political movements that first emerged in the 1960s. The New America is the progressive coalition of groups whose political consciousness was stirred in that decade. African Americans, young people, working people, gays, immigrants, educated professionals, and the non-religious. What holds that coalition together is a commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that commitment provoked a fierce backlash in 2016. In fact, a conservative backlash has defied the New America for more than 50 years. The backlash came from the old America, mostly white, mostly male, mostly older, mostly conservative, mostly religious, and mostly non-urban. In 2016, the old America rallied to the theme, Make America Great Again. It was a call to restore the America they feared was being swept away by a tide of political correctness. The two moments collided under President Barack Obama. Within weeks of Obama's inauguration on January 20th, 2009, a right-wing opposition movement broke out in the form of the Tea Party. Republicans rode that anger to power in Congress, gaining control of the House of Representatives in 2010 and the Senate in 2014. Within one day of Trump's inauguration, a backlash broke out on the left, with a massive spontaneous women's march in Washington that drew throngs of supporters in cities across the United States. Using the Tea Party as a model, Democrats hope to ride anger on the left to power. The right and the left started their journeys at the same place, 38%. That's the vote that Barry Goldwater got in 1964 and that George McGovern got in 1972. The Republican presidential vote peaked with Richard Nixon in 72 at 61% and Ronald Reagan in 84 at 59%. The Democratic presidential vote rose to a bare majority with Jimmy Carter in 76, 50.1%, and then took 32 years to reach a majority again, whereupon the new backlash quickly set in on the right. As of 2017, the Democratic Party had less clout in national and state governments than at any time since 1928. Things started out pretty bad for Democrats. In 1972, a Democratic operative recounted the story of how George McGovern's campaign manager had called the Democratic congressional candidate in Ohio. "I have wonderful news for you," the campaign manager said. "Senator McGovern is coming to campaign in your district." "That is good news," the local candidate responded, "but I'm afraid I'm going to be in Florida visiting my mother." "Wait a minute," McGovern's campaign manager said. "I haven't told you when he's coming." "It doesn't matter," the Democratic candidate replied. "Whenever he shows up, I'll be in Florida visiting my mother." Democrats were forced to accommodate to the new conservative ascendancy. Bill Clinton, who fashioned himself a new Democrat and a proponent of the third way, got elected in 92 with 43% of the vote. The presidential vote was split three ways that year, with independent Ross Perot receiving 19%. Clinton's coattails were unimpressive. Democrats lost seats in the House of Representatives in 92. It was the first election following a census and redistricting. Redistricting always puts incumbents, mostly Democrats in 92, at a disadvantage because they're forced to compete in an unfamiliar electorate. The contours of Clinton's 92 victory were different from anything Democrats had won with before. Democrats may have nominated two Southern white Baptists for president and vice president in 1992, but the Clinton-Al Gore ticket fared worse in the South. It was the only region in the country where George H.W. Bush led Clinton by 2 points. Among whites born in the South, the base of the pre-1960s Democratic coalition, Bush ran 19 points ahead of Clinton. Clinton's vote, weakest in the South and strongest in the East and West Coast, did not look like the Democratic votes that had elected Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. It resembled the votes the Democrats got when they nominated liberals such as George McGovern in 72 and Michael Dukakis in 88. That's why 92 was a breakthrough for Democrats. It was the first time they won with a vote that looked like the new America, but it was still not a majority. Clinton narrowly missed a majority when he was reelected in 1996 with 49%. Perot was on the ballot again. Al Gore carried the popular vote in 2000, but it was not quite a majority, 48%. John Kerry in 2004, same thing, 48% no victory. The breakthrough finally came in 2008 when Barack Obama won a solid majority, 53%, the highest percentage for a Democratic president since Lyndon Johnson. Even so, you could argue that the 2008 Democratic vote was inflated by the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. What if there'd been no crisis? That's why Obama's re-election in 2012 came as such a shock. Obama was re-elected with a majority, 51%, despite a sluggish economic recovery. The new America came out to protect its president and to prove that its coming to power was not a fluke. However, 2016 was an even bigger shock because Trump's primary and general election victories were unexpected. Standoff, How America Became Ungovernable by Bill Schneider.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Roles as we make our global instant. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Michelle Obama has launched a new website. I believe she's the main person behind this. We'll find out in just a second. It's called whenweallvote.org. Up at the top, questions about voting, 866-OUR-VOTE, and then the big buttons in the middle, check your ballot and find where and when to vote. You can also check your voter registration status and find out if you're still able to register. On the line with us, the former governor of the state of Virginia, the former chair of the Democratic Party, the DNC, and author of the memoir, What a Party, My Life Among Democrats, is Terry McAuliffe. Governor McAuliffe, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since you've been on.
It's great to be back with you, buddy.
So tell us about this. You're pitching the website out there now, right? And getting people out to vote.
Listen, there's nothing more important. I tell you, I've said this for many years. This is the most important election of all time. But, you know, with the House of Representatives right within our grasp to have a check and balance on the Trump administration. But I'm also very excited about, Tom, of the governor's races. We're going to win anywhere from 6 to 10 governors, which is so important for 2021 redistricting. And that will determine how our party is over the course of the next 10 years. And I tell everybody, you got to get out to vote. Your vote does matter. Last year in Virginia, as you know, we had historic elections. We won 15 House of Delegate elections, most since 1880. But one seat for control of the chamber, it was a tie. Out of 20 votes cast, it was dead even. The winner was picked out of a bowl, and unfortunately, a Republican name was picked out of the bowl. I'm just telling you, don't anyone tell you your vote doesn't matter.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Yeah. So the website, whenweallvote.org, was this Michelle Obama's idea?
Yes, it was, and I think it's a great idea. And just what she's trying to implore on people is that in the 2016 election, 92 million Americans who had the right to vote did not exercise that right to vote. And as you know, Hillary Clinton lost 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, by a combined total of 77,000 votes. And yet 92 million people did not vote, and many of them woke up the next day and said, holy cow, how did Trump get elected?
Yeah.
It happened because people didn't vote. And
Well,
that's what Obama's trying to do.
It also happened because people can't vote. I mean, you know, we saw this in 2000 when George Bush's brother Jeb had Katherine Harris use the Texas felon list to throw 60,000 African Americans off the voting rolls to get close enough that the Supreme Court could make him president. That was election fraud. That kind of voter suppression is naked election fraud. And I don't recall the Democratic Party talking about that, which made me crazy at the time and still does. And it's continuing in Florida. You know, Greg Palast just sued the state of Florida for the purge list and that they conducted down there. And I'm sorry, this is Georgia. In Georgia. Just sued for the
names.
Right. Well, and not only that, he found that there's I think 300,000 of those. He actually paid a direct marketing company that maintains mailing lists for like catalog companies, and said, here's the list. Here's this almost 500,000 list of people who've been purged from Georgia's rolls in the last year. How many of these are actually still living where they're supposed to be living? And the company came back with an exact number. It was like 341,121 people. And I'm doing that from memory, but I think it's right. And in other words, those people, they're going to go to the polls and they're going to be told, well, I don't see you on the poll list, but here's a provisional ballot, which will never be counted. And they're going to think they voted. I mean, we have been seeing this since 2000 with the redshift numbers, where the exit pollsters are saying, oh, yeah, the Democrat won this state, the Democrat won that state, the Democrat won this, and the outcome from the voting machines, and for a while we thought it was electronic voting machines doing it. Obviously it's been voter suppression all these years. The outcome would say, no, I'm sorry, the Republican won. When is the Democratic Party going to wake up and take this on? Can you imagine if Democrats had been throwing white suburban voters off the voting rolls in Democratically controlled states? The Republican Party would be out there. You would have Cliven Bundy leading, you know, an armed group down the street in those states.
Tom, you are giving my speech. I do this every single day. As governor, I got rid of the OptiScan voting machines because they were corruptible. I had actually had hackers come in. They were able to get into my machine in within 6 minutes. So we got rid of all those, so you now have to use a paper ballot. But you are right. This goes on across the country. As governor, I vetoed a bill that came to my desk that in order to get an absentee ballot in Virginia, you have to fax in your driver's license. Now, I don't know, Tom, if you got a fax machine at home.
No.
But most people don't.
Yep.
And a lot don't have driver's license. Now, I vetoed that. But if I weren't governor, that would be the law of the land in Virginia today. This is why I tell you these governors' races are so important. We're down to 16 Democratic governors in America. They have consistently purged lists. They try to shut down early vote. They try to take polling stations away from African-American communities. You look what happened in 2010, Wisconsin legislature. The Republicans pick up both chambers. What do? 300,000 people. They put a new voter ID law on. 300,000 people were disenfranchised in Wisconsin, who voted for President Obama in 12, went back for Hillary in 16, could not vote because of a new voter ID law, and she lost the state by 22,000.
And on top of that, Scott Walker purged almost 200,000 people from the voting lists in the year before that election in 2016.
This is what they're doing. That is why I'm telling people who are listening to your show, you've got to get out there. We got to win. Now, listen, we're right now, Tom, I can tell you we're winning Michigan, the governors, pickups, Michigan, Maine, Illinois, Wisconsin, Nevada, New Mexico, Florida, Iowa. We're competitive, dead even in Georgia, South Dakota, Ohio. This is where the purges have gone on. If we can get a Democratic governor, as I say, we're down to 16, we can stop this. And then for redistricting in 2021, you know, why are we having such a problem? Because Trump is such a failure and his fear and division and hatred are defining his presidency. Why aren't we winning 150 seats? Because in 2011, they drew lines across America, the Republican majorities with the governors, and put us into a permanent minority.
Yeah, through the redistricting. Gerrymandering. I get that, but I have not heard you yet answer my question, basically, Governor, which was, when is the Democratic Party going to make this an issue and explicitly call the Republicans out for election fraud. They've been using the word voter fraud for years, and we know that that's BS. This is actual demonstrable election fraud. When is the Democratic Party, A, going to start kicking ass on this, and B, offering a solution? I would think the obvious solution is either a constitutional amendment or a law through Congress that says that there is an absolute right to vote. Something like on a variation on restoring the Voting Rights Act.
And when we get the Congress back, it's exactly what we need to do. And I'm going to brief all the new governors when they get elected, because a lot of this, as you know, is state law.
Yeah.
And the states run the elections in their states. Is say this is the things that you have to do to go forward, to get rid of, there ought to be no excuse absentee ballot. If you want to vote early, you ought to go vote early, Tom.
Sure.
Why should you have to sign a form like you do in Virginia today under penalty of perjury that you'll be out of state and all these things you have to go through? But you're right. These are the things we need to do. But people have been raising this issue. This is something, I restored more felon rights than any governor in American history. We got to enfranchise people. We got to protect them. But the governors are the ones who do it in their states because they run elections in the states.
Yeah, okay. The website is whenweallvote.org. And this was Governor Terry McAuliffe, former governor of Virginia, former head of the DNC, and author of the memoir, What a Party. Governor, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Thank you. Get everybody out.
Yeah, I'm in. We're working on it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good talking with you. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Barry, watching Free Speech TV in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Barry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good. Okay, you've been talking a lot about the Republicans using fear tactics to get people to vote Republican, like those dark people from Honduras and Guatemala are coming in. They're going to spread disease.
Yeah, it's not just fear. It's always racialized fear, and it has been since the 60s with Nixon. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Also, my point is, I think the Democrats should counterattack with fear tactics of our own, such as these white nationalist Republicans are coming to take your health care. They're coming to take your vote. They're coming to take your Social Security. They're coming to destroy your planet.
Well, those are actually legitimate concerns, Barry. I mean, the Republicans are actually trying to do those things. The Democrats are not trying to open the borders. It's like it's a complete lie.
Right. Well, that's exactly my point. While the Republicans, use fear tactics based on lies, we can use our fear tactics based on the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you, and these things do need to be emphasized, and this is why I was beating up Terry McAuliffe. It's like the Democratic Party needs to start taking names and kicking ass, and this is a great place to start. Barry, thanks for the call. Jeanette in Seattle. Hey, Jeanette, what's up?
Well, I was looking at this story that Snopes says is a myth about King Christian. I'm remarking on the guy who was talking about the felt on the heart and being visibly, in opposition. And Snopes says it's a myth, but it was started by Swedish Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. During Hitler Germany, there's a story that there was a dictum that all the Jews had to wear an armband with the Jewish star.
Right.
And that in Denmark, the king there said, then we'll all wear Jewish stars. And that's what happened. So it's not exactly what the man was talking about, but it's a visual of where people stand in solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
According to this, it was really an idea from a Swedish cartoon. But the Danes did wear red and white 4 coins totaling 9 in a buttonhole or something that it was visible. 4 coins tied together. And so they didn't wear the armband, but they did do that, according to this article that I'm reading.
In solidarity with the German Jews.
Not just, also seeing each other wearing these things and strength in numbers.
Yeah.
And that is one reason I think, I'm not sure of this, that voting in person here in Washington is no longer. We don't get to go to the polls, talk to each other ahead of time, and exchange ideas the way we did at one point in time. We're doing it by mail with Diebold, I might add, counting our ballots.
Oh, my.
And they were kicked out of California, of course. I won't go there. But any comments you can make along that line, I'd appreciate. You're pretty much a master of history. Maybe you can drum some of this up. But I'm looking at it right now on Wikipedia and Snopes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll get off.
No, it was good, Jeanette. And
thanks, Tom.
Thank you. And you know, voting used to be a kind of civic thing where people would, you know, hey, I saw you at the polls, and you'd run into friends and things like that. We have vote by mail here in Oregon as well. The flip side of it is I literally spent a half hour with the voter guide going through each one of the ballot measures and things and trying to really understand them, which was really great. Jeanette, thank you for the call. It's a conversation we need to have. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Here with you, Rick Perry accidentally told the truth that the Trump administration, right after the elections, intends to move forward on dumping radioactive waste at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. This is causing no shortage of problems for Dean Heller, the Republican senator who's running against Democrat Jackie Rosen. Jackie Rosen, it's about 50-50 right now. And Nevada, of course, is very opposed to being the entire nation's toxic nuclear waste dump site. And but Rick Perry, you know, last Friday, it just was reported today or yesterday. Rick Perry came out and said, "Oh yeah, that's what we're going to do." Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay, they've got a serious problem. And we've been talking also about the pharmaceuticals now. The blood pressure medications are contaminated by rocket fuel. They're made that causes cancer. They're made in China and imported into the United States by the pharmaceutical companies. 80% of our drugs now are made in China or India. And yet the Republicans tell us that they have to keep on the books a law that says that you can't, you know, if your pharmacy says, oh yeah, that drug you've been taking, you know, the price just tripled in the last 2 years. Tough luck. And you could buy it from a pharmacy in Mexico or in Canada or in the UK or in France for a fraction of the price. I mean, literally, in some cases, 1/10 the price. It's the exact same drug, or in many cases, it's actually the same drug manufactured in Europe instead of in China, right? The Republicans tell us we can't do that. We can't buy our drugs cheaper from a pharmacy online in Canada or in England because it might not be safe. And now we're discovering that this whole family of drugs, these angiotensin II blockers, angiotensin is a hormone you produce that increases your blood pressure. And so by blocking it, it downregulates your blood pressure. That this family of drugs are contaminated with this rocket fuel that causes cancer in China. And then they ship them into the United States where they're delivered to us in our pharmacies. And I'm particularly flipped out about this because I take this family of drugs. But you know, the big point here is that China has A, no consumer protection laws, no product liability laws, and B, They make 80% of our drugs. This one expert here on this that was named Woodcock was quoted in this article from NBC News as saying, if we are ever in an international incident with China, they would literally have their hands around our necks in terms of critical drugs. They wouldn't even have to fire a shot. They make 80% of our drugs. Gibson, another consultant, said China made the strategic decision to develop its pharmaceutical industry and has succeeded, undercutting prices and grabbing market share. Penicillin's a good example. You can't buy penicillin from anywhere except China now because, well, this is a quote, we don't make penicillin ingredients even in this country anymore. That happened because the Chinese companies came in, dumped it on the global market at a very low price, and now they are the largest producer of penicillin industrial ingredients in the whole world. And they add, if you think this is bad, wait until we get into a serious conflict with China. Hospitals have become centers of chaos and death. We're not talking about expensive designer drugs not being available here. We're talking about penicillin. We're talking about basic antibiotics. We're talking about anesthetics. This person said you literally would not be able to do surgery in American hospitals. You wouldn't have the anesthesia. You couldn't provide dialysis. You wouldn't be able to provide the antibiotics necessary. It's insane. But that's, you know, the Republicans say, sorry, you can't, buy your, and you know, we're gonna give more passes, you know, on the Buy America Act for even the U.S. military to buy drugs from China. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's up?
Two things. The first is Donald Trump keeps talking about the press giving him negative publicity. The press needs to fire back with both barrels and basically say, Mr. Trump, you are a negative, malicious, vindictive person.
They're already doing that, Brad, and it feeds him, and it feeds his supporters. I think what the press needs to do is stop reporting on him. They need to have, you know, their a little 1 or 2 minute update in their newscast every hour on the cable networks and every night on TV. That's like, well, here's the lies that came out of Donald Trump today, and then for the newspapers, take him off the front page and put a little box on the page with the comics and the horoscopes. This was George Lakoff's suggestion. Put a little page on the page, a little box that says, you know, here's what Trump did today. And just relegate it to the background. Justin Frank, the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch, was on the program in the first hour today, and he said if the newspapers and the radio and TV would do that, Trump would go nuts. He would have a psychological meltdown, and he would become far less effective at what he is doing as a consequence of it.
The other part is that I think with regard to all of the fear-mongering and stuff like that, fear and hyperbolic lying are the tools of totalitarians to deceive, and because they're going to take away everyone's freedom, not just, I mean, it's not, the white people are going to be constricted if Trump takes over, because if you don't adopt to a certain kind of whiteness, you're going to be the one kept in the dockhouse.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Brad. I mean, this is how authoritarianism works. It's how it's worked in every country it's been tried, and it's how it will work here if Trump succeeds. If the Democrats don't take the House, and ideally the Senate as well in this election, this may be the last serious free election in the United States. I don't think that's an exaggeration.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're going to check in with Angela Baca, our pot expert, right after the break and find out what the state of that is. You know, you can relax, right? We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism by Ian Bremmer. This is from Chapter 1, titled Winners and Losers. It's time for a local revolution, the candidate told the roaring crowd. Countries are no longer nations, but markets. Borders are erased. Everyone can come to our country, and this has cut our salaries and our social protections. This dilutes our cultural identity. Marine Le Pen's 4 sentences capture every important element of the anxiety rising across the Western world. The borders are open and the foreigners are coming. They'll steal your job. They will cost you your pension and your health care by bankrupting your system. They will pollute your culture. Some of them are killers. Le Pen fell short in her bid to become France's president in 2017, but her message remains compelling for the 21st century politics of us versus them. But this is not a story about Marine Le Pen or Donald J. Trump or any of the other populist powerhouses who have emerged in Europe and the United States in recent years. Spin the camera toward the furious crowd. There's the real story. It's not the messenger that drives this movement. It's the fears, often, if not always, justified, of ordinary people. Fears of lost jobs, surging waves of strangers, vanishing national identities, and the incomprehensible public violence associated with terrorism. It's the growing doubt among citizens that government can protect them, provide them with opportunities for a better life, and help them remain the masters of their fate. As of December 2015, just 6% of people in the United States, 4% in Germany, 4% in Britain, and 3% in France believe the world is getting better. The pessimistic majority suspects that those with power, money, and influence care more about their cosmopolitan world than they do about their fellow citizens. Many citizens of these countries now believe that globalization works for the favored few, but not for them. And they have a point. Globalization, the cross-border flow of ideas, information, money, people, goods, and services, has resulted in an interconnected world where national leaders have increasingly limited ability to protect the lives and livelihoods of their citizens. In the digital age, borders no longer mean what citizens think they mean. In some ways, they barely exist. Globalism, the belief that the interdependence that created globalization is a good thing, is indeed the ideology of the elite. Political leaders of the wealthy West have been globalism's biggest advocates, building a system that has propelled ideas, information, people, money, goods, and services across borders at a speed and on a scale without precedent in human history. Sure, more than 1 billion people have risen from poverty in recent decades, and economies and markets have come a long way from the financial crisis. But along with new opportunities come serious vulnerabilities, and the refusal of the global elite to acknowledge the downsides of the new interdependence confirms the suspicions of those losing their sense of security and standard of living that elites in New York and Paris have more in common with elites in Rome and San Francisco than with their discarded countrymen in Tulsa, Turin, Tuscaloosa, and Toulon. The globalists gutted the American working class and created a middle class in Asia, former White House strategist Steve Bannon told The Hollywood Reporter a few days after Donald Trump's 2016 election victory. The issue is now about Americans looking not to get effed over, end of quote. In the United States, the jobs that once lifted generations of Americans into the middle class and kept them there for life are vanishing. Crime and drug addiction are rising. While 87% of Chinese and 74% of Indians told pollsters in 2017 that they believe their country is moving in the right direction, only 43% of Americans said the same thing. In Europe, the European Commission and the unelected bureaucrats who enforce its rules have legislated for its 28-member nations without understanding their very needs. In recent years, they've failed to halt a debt crisis that has forced many Europeans to accept lower wages, higher prices, later retirement, less generous pensions, and an uncertain future, all while telling them that they must bail out foreign countries that have spent their way into debt. In the migrant crisis, globalist European leaders insisted that all EU members must accept Muslim refugees in numbers determined in Brussels, and barricades and a spike in nationalism were the result. I'm defining nationalism here as one form of us versus them intended to rally members of one nation against those of other nations. Were the wave of populist nationalism sweeping the United States and Europe only signs of globalism's failure, it would be bad enough. But there's a larger crisis coming. Many of the storms creating turmoil in the U.S. and Europe, particularly technological change in the workplace, broader awareness of income inequality, are now headed across borders and into the developing world, where governments and institutions are not ready. Developing countries are especially vulnerable because the institutions that create stability in developing countries are not as sturdy and social safety nets aren't nearly as strong as in the United States and the European Union. They face an even bigger gap between rich and poor, and the reality that new technologies will kill large numbers of jobs that lifted expectations for a better life will be much harder to manage. In short, just as the financial crisis had a cascading effect through financial markets and real economies around the world, so the sources of anger convulsing Europe and America will send shockwaves through dozens of other countries. Some will absorb these shocks, some of them won't. As poorer people in developing countries become more aware of what they're missing or losing, many will pick up rocks. The book, Us Versus Them by Ian Bremmer.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me, and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us today is our old buddy Angela Baca, who is, excuse me here, freelance writer and editor. There we go. Freelance writer and editor and among other things, an expert on pot. And as we all try to take a deep breath every now and then and maybe get off the Trump train, you know, this is a useful thing. And also, pot is on the ballot all over the country, speaking of the electoral pieces of this. Angela, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So how's pot doing on the ballots across the country? Where is it on the ballot, and what sort of response do you expect?
Well, I don't know that you could separate the cannabis issue from the Trump train, especially since he's continued to make statements publicly that there will be some sort of federal change after the election. Every year that we see a cannabis initiative on a ballot, they tend to do better than all other politicians, Republican or Democrat. So we're looking at these ballot initiatives in different states as maybe even having an effect on the elections that are happening there. Right now, there are legalization initiatives on the ballot in North Dakota and Michigan, and medical on the ballot in Missouri and Utah, and I have a special background in both of Missouri and Utah.
So what are your thoughts on how this is going to shake out? You think that we're actually, you know, and is this the beginning of a nationwide wave? Do you see the Trump administration or some future administration reclassifying pot?
I really think President Obama had a great opportunity to do that before he was replaced by a Republican with a harsher stance on the issue. However, yeah, I do see this continuing a wave and bringing out a lot of people to the ballot, specifically to vote for these cannabis issues who may contribute to a potential blue wave.
Yeah, remarkable. Is there any news on the pot front? You know, I know that in Oregon, for example, some of the growers are having problems because there was a glut in the market. California just legalized, and there's, you know, how is that market shaking out? How are in the states that have legalized marijuana, recreational marijuana? How's it working out?
Well, that's part of the problem. So under federal law, if you've legalized marijuana in a state like Oregon or California or Colorado, that marijuana that's been produced legally in state can't leave the state. And over the last 5 or 6 decades, almost all of the cannabis that's been consumed in the United States has come from one of these states. So we legalized in state production, but we didn't legalize the export that a lot of the communities in these places have been relying on. I see kind of economic collapse happening in southern Oregon and northern California after the harvest season this year. And I also see a situation where, thanks to complicated laws and limited licenses, you have Wall Street coming in and carving up the market before it goes legal federally, which we do know is on the horizon.
Right. So you think that it's going to end up going the way that essentially alcohol has done, where You've got, some boutique producers, but by and large, you've got a dozen companies or fewer. I think in the alcohol industry, it's probably 5 or 6 companies that basically own the vast majority of the marketplace.
Absolutely, and it's part of the reason why it's been so hard for patients in places like Utah and Missouri to get what they need. They're up against a big money machine who doesn't really care about their health, but more about how they're going to dominate profits in the legal market. Which big money machine is working the hardest to keep marijuana or cannabis illegal? Is it the alcohol industry? Is it the pharmaceutical industry? Is it or is it just Republicans who just want to fall back on the old reefer madness stuff about Mexicans and black people and whatnot and hippies? The hatred association. There's still a cultural element to the opposition, but the funding behind it is largely coming from pharmaceuticals, alcohol, and tobacco. In the case of Utah, the biggest lobby against cannabis has been the LDS Church, which has billions of dollars in pharmaceutical stock holdings, as well as $32 billion in stock holdings generally, which include private prisons. So it's been a really hard fight in Utah this year up against that money machine. Yeah, remarkable stuff. Angela Baca, freelance writer, expert on pot. You can tweet her at Angela Baca, B-A-C-C-A. Angela, any other news you want to share with us today? Only that there are these marijuana initiatives coming to the ballot, and if people turn out in big numbers for them, it would really help us make the federal case to change the law. There you go. Angela Baca, thank you so much for being with us, Angela. Thanks for having me. Great talking with you, as always. Let's see here. Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Well, the original thing I had said about was that one of the things that I think that people that are not necessarily Republicans but conservatives tend to vote the way they do is just because of, like, you had a caller just before I called in that mainly described everybody that was a Trump voter as being a troglodyte, some kind of a heathen, close to a Hun. And, I don't think I fall in that category. And
no, I wouldn't say that either, Bill. I would say that, there are, obviously the Trump voters who show up with tiki torches shouting Jews will not replace us actually fall in those categories. But I think the majority of Trump voters are just people who have been, they're victims. They're suckers. Trump and the Republican Party sold them a line and they bought it. I feel sorry for them.
Well, no, that's true in my case because the tax law, I took a look at it. And, I'm semi-retired, but I still work for a company where I can't take off business expenses, unreimbursed expenses. And I'm surprised nobody's brought that up. It's going to kill me tax time. Yeah. Because that money, I just can't take it all, particularly mileage.
No, and plus all the Trump voters who live in high state income tax states, who live in California, New York, places like that, they're all getting screwed by the Republican tax law as well. So, Bill, I think that's the main thing. I just I feel sad for people who voted for Trump, and I pray literally and hope that we can wake them up.
Can I bring up one other point, though? The young lady that just now spoke, and she was talking about the opponents to the cannabis.
Yeah.
She said something that's definitely not true. You can look at the Wall Street Journal. I live in Richmond. Philip Morris just now invested a bunch of money out of Canadian cannabis company.
Mm-hmm.
So I can assure you the tobacco companies don't have any problem at all with marijuana because it's not even competitive.
Well, just because they invested in a company that eventually they may, and an industry that they may eventually jump into, doesn't mean that they're not trying to keep pot illegal here in the United States. They can do both. Both things can be true. Bill, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Charles in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Yes, I didn't see the the whole first hour of your program, and I am a long-time listener. And actually, when you repeated some of the points that were made, they were some of the points that I was going to make about a plan to mitigate Trump fear speech.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to flesh that out a little bit more. And basically, I guess what you had and was expressed earlier was a timeout for Trump, which would be great. that the news organizations would not cover any live feed or video of them, which would just drive them crazy.
Yeah.
But in terms about, in respect to forcing these actions, last week I felt pretty good because MSNBC, a couple of their presenters, seemed to kind of dance around this issue, and I believe it's Michelle Wallace mentioned that they had a video of Trump queued up, but she thought it would just upset her stomach too much to play it at this time of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, her name isn't Michelle. I'm forgetting her first name, but whatever.
I think it's Michelle.
Well,
but,
could be
but in
any
any
Wallace
case,
is her last name.
it's kind of interesting because she's I guess still is a Republican, but
yes.
She's
MSNBC loves the Republicans.
Yeah, but she really hates Trump.
Yeah.
But in any case, just to flesh out the plan a little bit more, I would suggest that a lot of anti-Trump organizations or just private parties get together and organize a massive write-in to these news organizations, just expressing the point they don't want to see him on video, and if in fact they're going to report news on him, report that he's expressing hate speech and fear and lies.
Yeah, I think that's how you do it. You say, Donald Trump is promoting fear and lies again on Twitter. We're not going to tell you what his promotion of it is because that just makes it even worse. But he's at it again. Just thought you'd want to know.
Yeah, but we don't want to hear about it. So take it off your newscast.
Exactly. We need to be telling people this. Charles, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
This is why it's probably been quite a while since you've heard Donald Trump on this show. I think it's just wrong to be amplifying his lies and his hate. And welcome back. Tony in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, it's been a long time since I talked to you. You've already pretty much covered everything that I wanted to say. Regarding the media and its involvement with Trump, and I got to give Trump in one area. It's on sensationalism, and that's what he does. And they constantly buy in to this sensationalism of troops and whatever, and it's so insane that and you've already espoused the solution is just mention it and move on.
Right.
The real things.
Yeah, Trump said something very revealing back during the campaign. He was asked what his favorite books were, and he said, well, of course I love the Bible, but P.T. Barnum wrote a pretty good book. And so I did a book report on it. I actually read part of his book for the book reports that we do during the breaks at the top and bottom of the hour. And P.T. Barnum's book was actually a pretty good self-help book. It was a kind of generic, it was like an 1890s version of Dale Carnegie. But P.T. Barnum also, I believe, famously said, I don't care what they say about me, just as long as they spell my name right. I believe that was Barnum. And whether it was Barnum or not, Trump has certainly internalized that. He complains about negative coverage. If he actually legitimately wanted to complain about negative coverage, he would say, see this article here? See where it says this about me? That's simply not true, and here's the proof. But he doesn't, forgive me, I have the hiccups. But he doesn't do that because he actually likes the negative coverage because he knows it's better than no coverage at all. He's been doing this since the 1970s. He's constantly gotten himself in the press. He used to leak negative information about himself when he was having an affair with Marla Maples to the New York Post. I mean, and then the story would blow up, and then they'd come to him and say, well, what do you think about this leak, Mr. Trump? It came from this guy, John Barron. And Trump would go, oh, that guy's a fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's completely wrong. And he's debating himself in the media, right? And
there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's his philosophy. So when he complains about the press, all he's trying to do is goad the press into covering the fact that he's complaining about them. And then the added twofer, you know, the added benefit that he gets out of it is that his followers all feel like he's the victim of some, you know, giant conspiracy, you know, made up by journalists. And now they've got the probably added caveat, the Jewish journalists, you know, that, you know, which is traveling around in the right-wing circles right now and starting to break through into the more mainstream right wing. I mean, it's just bizarre.
I have to correct you on one thing, though. You said he would quote the paper and go to the Since he doesn't read, that's not possible for him to refer to any specific.
He has people who read for him. They would come to him and they would say, "Here you go." But
it's got to be a summary.
Yeah,
okay.
I think your point is well taken.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call, and. Tony, I appreciate it, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. They're in Cleveland, Ohio. It's really time for us to start looking at, you know, the scam that Trump is running, and that Fox News is helping him run, and for the rest of the media to just say enough already. You know, we're not going to participate in this scam anymore. We're just not. You know, we're going to talk about. You know, did you know that there's a war going on in Yemen? Did you know that there's still actually a war going on in Somalia, that Libya has still fallen apart? I mean, there's real stuff going on in the world. How about net neutrality? Let's talk about that. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies. Behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Bruce in Clinton, Iowa. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I was listening to what you were talking about with fear earlier, and I'm hoping you'll give me a little leeway with this, but I was thinking about what would FDR say, and I guess I'm going to give it my best shot. My fellow Americans, let me state clearly, the only thing we have to fear is Trump himself.
Nice. Let me just, you know, to cleanse the palate of you and our listeners, let me just share this.
Let me assert my firm belief.
I'm not hearing this. It's not.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
Now, that was in 1933. In fact, I think that was his inaugural address. And he was not talking about the Nazis. He was talking about the Great Depression.
Right, and sometimes it lets you know how little things have changed.
Yeah.
or how they've been twisted.
Yeah, there you go. But he was actually, this was a president of the United States who, in contrast to Nixon's message about, you know, fear black people and fear the hippies and fear, you know, and Bush's, you know, fear Willie Horton, and Trump and Bush Jr.'s shrubs, you know, fear the Muslims. In contrast, and now Trump's, fear the Mexicans and the Central Americans. In contrast to that, this was a president of the United States saying, fear paralyzes us. I mean, I think this is just the most important part of it right here.
Fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
And again, he was talking about just rebuilding America. It's just remarkable. Bruce, thanks for reminding me of that, and thanks for the great imitation. You did a very good job of that mid-Atlantic accent, and for giving me an excuse to play FDR on the radio. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. Joe in Long Beach, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Oh, hey, how's it going? Actually, I live in Albuquerque now, New Mexico.
Oh, okay. Next time you call in, tell Shira we'll update the database.
Sure. Actually, that gentleman's impersonation was excellent, and as well as the message. But basically, the way that you combat the Republican fear tactics is to cleverly mock them with Reagan's own words. Well, there they go again. And then we would interject, trying to rob you of your health care and pre-existing protections.
Right.
And then another thing, too, is I listened to Terry McAuliffe, nice guy. I don't mean him any disrespect, but what we lack as a party is speaking with conviction and passion. And that's where Trump is very effective, even though he touts lies and stokes fear. But that's one of the reasons why I am attracted to, Michael Avenatti. And I know your show has had discussions about him, but he does talk with conviction and passion. Mm-hmm. And we need to speak simply. And that's just where we are today.
Did you, by any chance, Joe, did you by any chance catch the Chris Matthews town hall college tour, or whatever he called it, down in Texas with Beto O'Rourke?
Yeah, excellent.
Beto seems to me like he could be this generation's JFK or FDR. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of think he's kind of Kennedy-esque, actually, if you ask me.
Yeah.
He's likable, he's good-looking, and he represents the millennial generation.
Yep. And he speaks with passion.
I saw Nancy Pelosi on one of the the nighttime shows, and I was not really happy. That was her platform to actually motivate people to go out and vote, not secure our potential position of winning.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was a mistake for her. I saw the clip from whatever late night show that was, where she said, "We've got it in the bag. Don't worry, we're going to win." And I thought that's not the message we should be. I mean, we hope to win, right? But
right.
With the voter suppression. Joe, I thank you for the call, and I agree with you. I wanted to get one last call in here before the end of the show. Ron in Portland, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Morning, Tom. I think you're 100% right in if we can get the media to stop covering his rallies, but I do think we need to take it one step further, and that is just stop them from going to the White House briefings.
Yeah. And standing next to the helicopter and going to the maggot rallies. I mean, all this stuff.
Exactly.
Just back off, give it a break, take it, walk away. I mean, they don't report on the Bernie Sanders rallies. They could do the same thing with Donald Trump. They could ignore him just as effectively.
Exactly. If the only people in the audience are National Enquirer and Fix News, I think it would be a whole different story.
I absolutely agree. Ron, thanks a lot for the call. The problem that we have is that so much of the media is driven by ratings. They don't care what impact they have on our democracy. They just want to know how much money are we going to make, how many people are watching, so that we can sell those numbers to our advertisers. And, that's sadly where we're at now as a result of, in part, what Reagan did in '87 with the Fairness Doctrine, and also in '96, the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And this massive media consolidation. But anyhow, we'll work on it, right? We need to get Democrats elected. So get out there, get to the polls, talk to your friends about it, get them motivated, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From you.